The tide had turned, and Coralie Bellamy could feel the sea coming back for her. She lay where the fall had thrown her, folded between two shelves of black rock at the foot of the cliff, one cheek against stone, slick and cold as a butcher's slab. Her right leg had stopped speaking to her entirely. The first time she tried to drag herself higher up the shingle, the pain had turned the whole night white and soundless, and she had not tried again. The water reached her boots, slid away, and returned a hand's breadth higher, unhurried, certain of itself. The sea, she thought, was patient in a way people never learn to be. High above her, along the black rim of the cliff, the coast road ran on toward Berwick. That was where the carriage had left the world. She remembered the sideways lurch, the horse's scream cut short, the door swinging wide against her shoulder as though it had never been fastened at all, and Gideon's face in the last of the lantern light watching her go. Not frightened. Not sorry. Only careful, the way a man is careful with a sum he has already decided to spend. "You ought to have let it lie, Coralie," he'd told her so kindly as he handed her up into the dark. "You ought to have burned the wretched thing and married someone dull." Hours before, she had stood at the edge of Lady Merivale's ballroom at Harrogate House, in a gown let out and taken in across 3 winters, and she had worn no jewels at all. Every other woman in that bright roaring room wore her lineage at her throat, diamonds, garnets, the cold inherited fire of 100 careful marriages. Coralie wore a bare neck and a borrowed fan, and the emptiness at her collarbone burned like a brand, because everyone beneath those chandeliers knew precisely why she had none. The Bellamy pearls had been carried out of her father's house in a locked box by Lord Renwick's clerks, counted against a debt her father had never owed, while Silas Bellamy stood at the window and said not one word. 3 weeks later, they pulled Silas Bellamy from the same gray sea and called it an accident, and buried the question along with him. They had called it a drowning. They had called it grief, a weak heart, an old man's confusion. They had called it every soft thing that was easier than the word murder. Coralie had not come to the ball to dance. She had come because her father had left her. The one thing the Renwicks did not know still existed, a bound packet holding the Halcyon's true manifest and 3 letters from the ship's underwriters, proof that the vessel had not foundered in a gale at all, but had been steered onto the Gallo sands on a flat, windless night, her hold half empty, her cargo insured to the last farthing. 9 men had drowned aboard the Halcyon. Her father had gathered the evidence that could hang the family who ordered it. And then her father had died, and the proof had come down to her, and for 4 months she had carried its secret like a coal held in a bare hand. She had meant, that night, to reach Mr. Pruitt, her father's old solicitor, who had promised to lay the packet before the harbor commissioners if only she could come to him unwatched. She never reached him. Gideon Renwick reached her first. He had been gentle with her all that season, and she had let herself lean toward the gentleness, because a woman who has lost everything holds her hands out to any warmth at all. He fetched her wine. He told her, the plainness became her, that she carried more dignity with a bare throat than the whole glittering room carried in its stones. And a little before midnight, he bent close and murmured with tender concern, that word had come from her lodgings. Her mother had been taken gravely ill, and a carriage was already waiting to carry her home. There was no illness. There was only the cliff road and the dark, and a carriage door that had never truly been latched. Now the sea climbed past her knees, and Coralie understood the whole shape of it. Come morning they would find a ruined girl broken on the rocks below the coast road, and lower their voices, and say the poor creature had wandered out half mad with grief and missed her step in the dark. Lord Renwick would send lilies. The packet hidden in the false floor of her trunk would be drawn out and burned before her mother had finished weeping, and the 9 men of the Halcyon would stay beneath the Gallo sands with no living soul left to speak their names. She had tried to do the single right thing her father had left undone, It was going to kill her, precisely as it had killed him. The cold had stopped hurting a while ago. She knew distantly what that meant. Coralie let her cheek settle against the wet rock and waited for the next wave, and found that she wanted, at the very end of everything, only to have been seen once, truly seen, as something more than a debt to be collected and closed. She did not hear the horse. She heard the man. God have mercy. Boots striking the shingle, fast, then splashing through the shallows. Then hands, hard, sure, unhesitating hands, closing over her shoulders, turning her, lifting her face clear of the rising water. She forced her eyes open. A man knelt over her, in the dark, bareheaded, his greatcoat already black with seawater to the waist, and when the moon slid free of the cloud, his face was a stranger's, lean, grave, cut with the kind of authority that is never argued with twice. "You're the Bellamy girl, not a question." His gaze moved down her, the twisted leg, the bare, salt-streaked throat, and something behind his eyes went very still and very cold. "You wore no jewels tonight. I searched that entire cursed ballroom for a woman wearing none, and by the time I understood it was you, you were already gone." Coralie tried to answer and managed only a thread of breath. "No, don't." His arm slid beneath her shoulders. "Don't spend what's left of you on words. I have you." He lifted her from the sea as though she were made of nothing, and against the murdering cold, his chest was impossibly warm. "I do not yet know the name of the man who did this," he said low and even against her ear. "But when I have it, he will wish the tide had been quicker. Stay with me. Keep your eyes on my face. You are not dying on this beach. I did not ride the length of this coast in the dark to carry a dead woman up off the rocks." The last thing Coralie Bellamy saw before the black closed over her was the signet on the hand that held her, a heron in flight, wrought in silver, wings thrown wide against the storm. And the last thought she carried down into the dark was vast and simple and absurd, that in all her life no one had ever come looking for her before. She did not yet know his name. She did not know she had just been lifted out of the sea by the one man in England the Rennecks had spent 20 years learning to fear. Coralie woke to firelight and the smell of tallow and clean linen, and for one merciful moment she did not remember the sea. Then she tried to move, and her body handed back the whole account at once, the splinted leg bound straight and heavy, the tight belt of bandage across her ribs, the deep ache behind her eyes. She lay in a narrow room with a low beamed ceiling, tucked beneath a quilt in a bed that was not her own. Rain ticked at a small square window. The fire had been built high in the grate, and in the chair beside it, unmoving, watching her, sat the man from the rocks. He had traded his ruined coat for a plain dark one, and in the steadier light she could see him properly. 35 perhaps, black hair graying at the temple, a face that surrendered nothing it had not first decided to give. He did not rise. He simply watched her surface the way a man watches to see whether a coal will catch. "You've slept the better part of 2 days," he said. "The surgeon set your leg. The fever broke last night. He also tells me you ought to be dead, so we will not put excessive faith in the surgeon." "Where am I?" Her voice came out a rasp she barely knew. "A house I keep above the harbor at Berwick. No one comes here I have not sent for, and no one below stairs knows your name." He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "Which brings us to the matter, Miss Bellamy. You were thrown from a moving carriage onto rocks above a rising tide. That is not an accident. Someone wished you gone and took some trouble over it. I should like his name." She had the strength to lie. She simply could not see the use of it anymore. "Gideon Rennick," she said. "And his father, Lord Rennick, who gave the order, though he will never once have touched the reins." Something crossed the man's face. Not surprise. Recognition. A cold private satisfaction quickly folded away. "The Rennicks," he repeated softly. "Why?" "So," she told him the halcyon. The gallows sands on a windless night, 9 drowned men and a hold insured for 3 times its worth. Her father, who had been a shipping agent, honest enough to notice and foolish enough to say so, ruined by manufactured debts, stripped to the walls, and then dead in the same gray water that had swallowed the crew. And the packet, the true manifest, the underwriters, letters, everything Silas Bellamy had assembled to prove the wreck was no wreck at all, now hidden in the false floor of her trunk at a lodging house the Rennocks would tear apart within the week. The man listened without a word until she finished. Then he said very quietly, "How many letters?" 3. Signed. Dated. She studied him. "Why does that matter to you, sir? You have not even told me your name." He was silent a moment. When he spoke, the control in his voice had a fracture running under it, hairline thin. "My name is Alaric Stern. I am the Duke of Ellesmere." He let that sit. "And 5 years ago my younger brother Rowan took passage home aboard a coasting brig called the Halcyon, because it was quick and cheap, and he was 22 and thought himself immortal. They told me a storm took her. There was no storm that night, Miss Bellamy. I have spent 5 years and a fortune trying to prove that one sentence, and never once come close. Every man who might have testified was bought, or frightened, or drowned." His gray eyes came up to hers. "And tonight, at a ball, I nearly did not attend. A man I have watched for years let slip that the Bellamy girl held proof enough to ruin his house, and meant to see her silence before morning. So I looked for you, a woman with no jewels. I was too slow to reach you in that room. I was not too slow on the road. The fire cracked in the long quiet. Then we want the same men dead," Coralie said. "We want the same men finished," he corrected. "Dead is easy, and over too quickly. I want them broken in front of everyone who ever bowed to them." He rose and crossed to the window. "Which is why I am going to make you an offer that will sound like madness, and is in fact the only arithmetic that saves your life. Marry me." The words dropped into the room like a stone into a well. "You cannot be in earnest." "I am never anything else." He turned. "Consider it plainly, for your survival depends on it. Gideon Rennick believes you dead on the rocks, and that belief is the only shield you have. The instant you surface as Coralie Bellamy, ruined and friendless and making wild accusations, it shatters, and they finish what the tide began. But a duchess cannot be quietly drowned. As my wife, you are beyond their reach, under my name, behind my walls. In return, you give me everything you remember and everything your father left, and we take the Rennocks apart together, carefully, completely, in the open. You don't know me. I know enough. You carried a hanging secret for months alone, rather than surrender it. You walked into a ballroom full of people who despise you, wearing no jewels, to do a dead man's work. And you lie here, with a broken leg, negotiating with a stranger, instead of weeping. Something almost like warmth touched the cold face. I have spent my life among people who mistake caution for courage. You are the first genuine article I have met in years, knowledge enough to marry on. I have staked far more, on far less." Coralie looked at the fire for a long moment. She thought of Gideon's careful, spending face. She thought of 9 men under the sand, and her father's good coat and the pearls carried out in a locked box. And she thought that she was being handed a blade, hilt first, by a man who wanted it used as badly as she did. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I will have your word on 3 things." He waited. "First, that this is justice, not only your revenge. The families the Rennocks ruined get restored, and the 9 men get their names spoken aloud in a court. Not just your brother, all of them." "Agreed." "Second, my mother and my younger sister live in Berwick, with nothing and no one to guard them. The moment the Rennocks doubt I am dead, those 2 are the softest way to reach me. They are protected tonight, not when it is convenient." The Duke drew a small book from his coat and wrote in it without sitting. "Riders will leave within the hour. Your mother and sister will have Ellesmere's men at their door by morning, and be behind its walls the moment the roads are safe. The third." If I ever become a danger to you, if keeping me costs you more than I am worth, you let me go. No argument, no debt owed." He was quiet. Then, oddly, he almost smiled. "And you were negotiating your own release on the day I offered to save your life. I have been owned by my debts once already, Your Grace. I will not be owned by my rescue." "Agreed," he said. "Though I will tell you now, for honesty's sake, that I do not think it will come to that." He crossed the room and held out his hand, hard, scarred across 2 knuckles, belonging to a man who had already decided how this ended. "Do we have a bargain, Miss Bellamy?" She looked at the hand. She had been carried from the cold by a man who wanted to make her a duchess so they might destroy the same family. Last night she had wanted only to be seen. She was being seen now as a weapon, precisely aimed. It would have to be enough. Coralie put her hand in his. "We have a bargain." His grip closed, warm and sure. "Then rest. When you can stand, I'll take you to Ellesmere, and we begin." He moved to the door, then paused. "You wanted to be seen. On those rocks I saw you." Then he was gone, and Coralie lay alone with the fire, understanding she had traded a man who wanted her dead for a man who wanted her useful and was not certain which would prove the colder bargain. 5 days later, Coralie sat in a carriage bearing a silver heron on its door, watching a coastline she did not know unspool past the glass, her splinted leg propped on cushions the Duke had ordered without being asked. He rode alongside rather than within, which told her something. He was scrupulous guardian and absent companion at once. He saw that she ate, that her dressings were changed, that a fur was tucked over her against the wind, and he never once asked a question that was not useful, nor offered a single fact about himself she had not paid for. It was, she thought, like being tended by a very exact machine that happened to have gray eyes. Then the road climbed a last headland, and Ellesmere came into view, and she forgot the machine entirely. She had expected grandeur. She had not expected a fortress. Ellesmere Hall stood on the cliff's edge, with its back to the whole gray weight of the sea. 4 stories of dark stone, blunt and unbeautiful, its seaward windows narrowed almost to arrow slits, as though the house had long ago decided the ocean was an enemy and built itself accordingly. Below it, the water threw itself white against the rocks and fell back and threw itself again, endlessly and uselessly. "It's magnificent," she said, when he brought his horse alongside the window. "It's defensible," he corrected. "My grandfather raised it to keep the sea and the excisemen both at a distance. We have never entirely trusted either." He nodded toward the great doors. "Can you walk in on my arm? The household will be waiting. They will forgive a limp. They will not forgive being kept from a first look at their duchess. I thought this was to be private. The marriage will be, the staff will not." He handed her down himself, careful of the leg, and as her good foot met the gravel, the doors opened and people began to file out, 30 of them at the least, from a butler folded double, with age to a scullery girl who could not have been 12. Coralie's breath faltered. "You are not the girl on the rocks," the Duke said quietly. "Only for her." "Not here. Here you are, the woman who lived through what should have killed her. Stand as though you know it." So she drew herself straight against the scream of her ribs and lifted her bare chin and let him walk her down the line. At its head stood a spare, iron-haired woman whose curtsy was a small, precise thing, given and withdrawn like a blade returned to its sheath. "Your Grace," the woman said. "Welcome home, Mrs. Penhallow." The Duke inclined his head. "This is Miss Coralie Bellamy. She will be Duchess of Ellesmere within the week. She is mending from an injury and will want careful handling and no gossip. See to both. Mrs. Penhallow's sharp eyes traveled the splinted leg, the fading marks along Coralie's temple, the too careful way she held herself, and something that might, in a warmer face, have been approval passed briefly across it. "Of course, Your Grace!" Then to Coralie with a shade less iron. "Welcome to Ellesmere, Miss Bellamy. Your rooms are aired and the fires are lit. You need only ask." "Thank you, Mrs. Penhallow," Coralie managed, keeping her voice level over the pain. "I mean to be no more trouble than I can help." The corner of the housekeeper's mouth moved, not a smile, but the distant relation of one. "In my experience, the ones who say so are the least trouble of all." The Duke had already released her arm. "Mrs. Penhallow will show you up. Rest tonight. We speak tomorrow." And he walked into his own house and left her on the step as if he had forgotten she existed the moment the performance ended. The house within matched the house without. Cold stone, dark wood, tapestries gone to smoke, portraits of unsmiling Sterns who had all it seemed been painted mid-argument with the weather. Mrs. Penhallow led her up a great staircase and along a sea-facing corridor. "His Grace keeps to the West Range," she said. "The library of an evening, his study by day. He does not care to be surprised in either." "And what does His Grace care for in a duchess?" The housekeeper paused, hand on a door. "I couldn't say, miss. We have never had one." She opened the door. "These are yours." The rooms were larger than the whole of the house Coralie had grown up in. A sitting room, a bedchamber hung in dark blue, a dressing room of empty wardrobes waiting to be filled. Through the seaward window, the water broke against the cliff, near enough that she felt the faint tremor of it in the floor. "His Grace has engaged a seamstress and 3 tutors," Mrs. Penhallow said, kneeling to coax the fire higher. "Deportment, dancing, the management of a great house. You've 6 weeks, miss, until the midwinter assembly at Harrogate. All the county comes to it." A short pause, waited. The Rennocks among them. So there it was, the deadline, and the trap, and the ballroom she'd been thrown off a cliff to keep away from, all in a single breath. Coralie's hands tightened in her lap. 6 weeks to become a duchess. 6 weeks to look like one, Mrs. Penhallow said, rising, brushing ash from her skirts. "Being one takes rather longer. But if I may speak plain, miss, His Grace does not make careless choices, and he has never once brought a stranger under this roof before. Whatever he saw in you, mind you don't let him be wrong about it." She curtsied and withdrew. Alone, Coralie went to the seaward window. Somewhere south along that same gray water was a beach where she had lain down to die, and a harbor town where her mother and sister now slept under a strange duke's guard, and a lodging house with a false-floored trunk that the Rennocks had surely already begun to hunt. She pressed her palm flat to the cold glass. A maid came a little after with a supper tray, and set beside it a slim book bound in black leather. "His Grace asked that you read it tonight, miss. He said you'd understand why morning come." When the girl had gone, Coralie opened the cover. The first page held a single line in a hard, upright hand. "No greeting, no name. Everything they took from you is written in the ledgers of men who think themselves untouchable. In 6 weeks, you and I are going to walk into a room full of those men. Learn every word of this before we do." She turned the page, and under the sound of the sea beating at the walls of her strange new fortress, Coralie Bellamy began, at last, to read. The leg mended slowly. The rest of her did not wait for it. By the second week, Coralie could cross a room on a cane without letting the pain reach her face, and the tutors the Duke had summoned fell on her like weather. A dancing master counted her through figures until her good foot ached. A brittle Frenchwoman drilled her in the exact depth of a curtsy owed to a baron of Viscount, an earl, a language of the spine in which a half-inch was an insult. A dry little man named Mr. Prammick. Odell made her memorize the whole tangled family tree of the county, who had married whose money, who had hated whom since the Civil War, and above all, everything the Rennocks owned, the underwriting house at Berwick, the 2 coasting fleets, the seat in the Lords that Lord Rennick had bought with other men's drowned cargo and never once earned. She learned the Duke, too, though he taught her nothing of himself on purpose. He rose before the servants and worked past midnight and seemed never to sleep. He despised idle talk and was magnificent at the useful kind. He forgot nothing, not a name, not a date, not a debt, and spent what he remembered like a man laying coins on a table, one at a time, exactly when it would cost you most. They dined together each evening at 8, at a table built for 20, the length of polished oak between them, like a moat neither would be the first to cross. It was on such an evening, in the 3rd week, that she asked him about his brother. He was quiet so long she thought he would simply decline. Then he set down his glass. Rowan was 22. He had been in the South, settling a matter. I was too proud to settle myself, and he took the halcyon home because she was sailing that tide, and I had told him, in a letter, in my own hand, not to dawdle. His voice never rose. That was the terrible part. I learned he was dead from a clerk's note. 4 lines, with the fair owing marked at the bottom. A storm, they wrote. I have since spoken to 3 men who were on that coast that night. There was no storm, Coralie. There was a calm sea, a false light, and a ship put deliberately onto the sand with my brother asleep in her. He turned his glass a quarter turn. I have spent 5 years and a fortune trying to prove those 2 sentences, and until you, I had nothing but my own certainty, which the law does not accept as evidence. And now you have me, she said, to be produced. A witness in a good gown. You object to the gown? I object to being kept in a drawer until you need me. She set down her own glass, and her hand did not shake. Your Grace, I did not survive that beach to be your final exhibit. My father drowned for these people. My name is the one they burned. When we take them, I do not want to be the thing that is shown to the room. I want to be one of the hands around their throat. For a moment he only looked at her down the length of that long, cold table. Then something shifted behind the gray eyes. Not softness, but a kind of recalculation, as though he had opened a ledger and found a figure larger than expected. You understand, this is not a duel, he said. It is slow, and it is ugly, and it is won in drawing rooms before it is ever won in a court. No temper, no confrontations I have not built for you first. You follow where I lead. I follow where you lead, she agreed. But I lead sometimes too. He was silent. Then, unexpectedly, he lifted his glass and inched toward her, the smallest salute a proud man could give. Then, welcome to the work, Duchess. She was not yet a duchess. That came 3 days later, in the gray chapel at the west end of the house, with 2 servants for witnesses, and Mrs. Penhallow standing dry-eyed at the back. It took under a quarter of an hour. He put a heavy ring on her finger, worn thin by 400 years of stern wives, and said the words in a voice that promised nothing and swore to everything. And when it was done, he pressed her cold hand once and said, "There! Now they cannot touch you." And it was less a vow than a fact, entered into a record. But it was the following morning that undid her composure entirely. For a traveling coach came up the headland under Ellesmere Guard, and out of it, white with the journey and clutching each other, stepped her mother and her sister Pippa, alive and whole and safe behind his walls. Exactly as he had promised on the first night when she had not believed a word he said, Pippa flung herself at Coralie hard enough to jar the mending ribs, and Coralie held on and did not care. And over the girl's head she found the Duke watching from the doorway, unreadable as ever. "You kept your word," she said. "I said I would." He turned to go, then paused. "I keep them all, Coralie. Every one." And he left her there with her arms full of the family the Rennocks had meant to use as the knife against her. Not knowing that 2 counties south, a man in Lord Rennick's pay had just pried up the false floor of an abandoned trunk in a Berwick lodging house, and found it empty. "Tonight is a rehearsal," the Duke said, "and rehearsals are where you learn what breaks." They stood in the great hall as the last light left the sea, and for once he had come to her rather than the reverse. He looked her over, the deep gray silk, the way she balanced her weight off the heeling leg, the bare hollow of her throat where the sapphires he'd offered still, pointedly, were not. "You will not wear them," he said. It was not quite a question. Not until the Rennocks are in the ground I choose for them, Coralie answered. I wore nothing at Harrogate because they had taken everything. I will wear nothing now for the same reason. Only this time it will be a choice, and everyone at this table will feel the difference without knowing why. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. You are learning to fight in a language they cannot object to. Good. 5 guests tonight. All of them matter. Watch me. Then do as I do. Then do better. They came as the clock struck 8. Lord and Lady Cathcart, old allies of the house, warm and shrewd. A barrister named Mr. Pleck. Ives with the flat, patient eyes of a man who has watched many people lie. Sir Gervase Keene, senior of the Berwick Harbour Commissioners, gouty and vain and useful. And last, sweeping in on her cane like a general reviewing poor troops, the Dowager Lady Sowerby, 70, sharp as a gutting knife. Famous across 3 counties for saying the thing everyone else had swallowed. So, Lady Sowerby announced, fixing Coralie with a stare that had unmade younger women, this is the Duchess who appeared out of a sea fog. You are handsomer than the gossip girl, which is a disappointment. Gossip is so much more fun when it is generous. Then I shall try to be more disappointing as the evening wears on, my lady, Coralie said, so as not to spoil your winter. A short bark of laughter. Ha! Perhaps you'll do. Dinner was a dance conducted with forks. Coralie remembered which one, and when. She praised Lady Cathcart's opinions and Sir Gervase's cellar. She drew Mr. Doffer, Ives out on the reform of widows' claims, a subject she had not had to feign an interest in, and she watched the Duke work the table the way a tide works a beach, patient, invisible, moving everything a little and nothing at once. It was Lady Sowerby who opened the door, as the Duke had wagered over their planning that she would. I'll tell you what curdles my winter, the old woman said, stabbing a potato. Losses. My late husband, God keep his tiresome soul, left half our fortune with a marine assurance house, and every year the returns grow thinner and the excuses grow fatter. A ship lost here, a cargo spoiled there, always some misfortune, never any fault. I begin to think the sea is remarkably obliging to certain gentlemen's account books. Which house, if I may ask, my lady? Coralie kept her voice light as spun sugar. Rennick's at Berwick. You'll know the name, everyone does. More's the pity. I know it well, Coralie said. She let the silence hang one beat too long, so that every head turned to her. Well enough that, were I in your ladyship's position, I should not wait for next year's thinner return. I should engage my own surveyor, an honest one from another county, and demand to see the loss records for every ship they have written off against your money. The manifest, the underwriter's letters, the survey of the wreck itself. She smiled, gentle as milk. An honest misfortune leaves a clean paper trail, my lady. It is only the manufactured ones that cannot bear to be read twice. Sir Gervase set down his glass with a small arrested click. Ives, the barrister, had gone very still, the way a hound goes still at a scent. That is a remarkable degree of particularity, Lady Sowerby said slowly, her old eyes narrowing not in offense but in interest, for a young woman who appeared out of a fog. My late father was a shipping man, my lady. Perfectly true, and it landed like truth. I learned to read a manifest before I learned to dance. I could never do the second half so prettily as the first. Discrepancies, said Mr. Fore, Ives quietly, to no one in particular, in a marine loss are not a private embarrassment. If a wreck were shown to be deliberate, that is not bad bookkeeping. That is a hanging matter, and a fraud upon every name in the syndicate. Precisely why, the Duke said, speaking for almost the first time, mild as weather. One hopes the records are perfectly clean for everyone's sake. He lifted his glass. More wine, Sir Gervase? By the time the carriages were called, the seed was planted and watered and beginning invisibly to root. Lady Sowerby paused at the door, drew on her gloves, and looked back at Coralie with something that was no longer quite mockery. "I shall write to my surveyor in the morning, Duchess," she said. "You have ruined a perfectly comfortable ignorance, and I find I am obliged to you for it. That is a rare and irritating sensation. I expect I shall come to enjoy it." And she swept out into the dark. Later, in the library, the Duke poured 2 glasses of sherry and handed her one without being asked, the first entirely unnecessary courtesy he had shown her. "You planted the first crack tonight," he said. "Sowerby will have an honest surveyor into Rennick's loss records within the fortnight, and she cannot keep a secret to save her life. You were the key I've wanted for 2 years." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "And you arranged none of it by accident. You knew she would open that door. I only left the door where she was already walking." Coralie sipped. "Reputations don't shatter, Your Grace. They craze, one hairline at a time, until someone leans on them and they come apart in his hand. And the Midwinter Assembly is where we lean," he said. "Where the Rennicks will be, watching me be alive." She set down the glass. The sea beat at the walls below. "Good. Let them wonder how much of that manifest still exists, and where." What neither of them yet knew was that Lord Rennick had been asking that same question for 3 sleepless nights, "Where is it now?" and had settled, at last, on the one pressure that had always in the end made a Bellamy do as it was told. The letter came for the Duke at breakfast, sealed with the Cathcart crest, and Coralie watched the news change his face by not changing it at all. "The Assembly has been moved," he said, folding the paper once. "Lady Merivale has brought it forward for the Earl of Woad, who must be in London by Candlemas. It is no longer 6 weeks away. It is 10 days. 10 days." Coralie set down her cup carefully because her hand wanted to jump. "I'm not ready." "You are readier than you think." And readiness was never going to arrive on its own. He rose and came down the table toward her, nearer than the moat usually allowed. "Your leg carries you. The tutors have wrung you dry. And you are angry, which is worth more than any of it, because anger holds a spine straight when courage has gone to water. 10 days is enough, and if I stand in that room and see Gideon Rennick's face and simply stop, then you remember what that face looked like as it watched you fall," he said without mercy and without heat, "and you let him see you walk toward him as living proof that he is not half so clever as his father believes. That is not cruelty, Coralie. That is arithmetic. He wagered your life on a latch and lost. Make him watch his own losses, the way he made you watch yours. You will practice being the Duchess of Ellesmere," he added, "until it stops being a costume and starts being a skin." The days that were left were their own small siege. She danced until the leg forgave her. She learned faces from Mr. Odell's little painted cards until she saw them behind her eyes. She practiced the art of saying nothing in the greatest possible number of gracious words. And, on the last night before they were to leave, unable to sleep, she went down to the library for a book to quiet her mind, and found the Duke already there. He stood at the black window with a glass he wasn't drinking, watching the sea he could only hear. He did not turn. "You cannot sleep?" he said. "No." "You? I don't? Much, I told you." A pause. "Afraid? Terrified? Good. Fear keeps the edge on." Now he did turn, and in the low firelight, the careful face had gone, for once, unguarded, tired, and younger, and for a moment, simply a man who had lost his brother to the same men who had thrown her off a cliff. "Coralie, what we are about to do is dangerous in a way the lessons cannot teach. The Rennicks will not merely deny us, they will strike back, and they will strike at whatever they think I cannot afford to lose. My mother," she had known it already, hearing it said aloud, "still cost her something, behind these walls, and guarded. But, yes," he set the glass down, "and there is another weakness they will look for, and I would rather you heard it named than have it used against us both. They will look to see whether the Duke of Ellesmere has been foolish enough to care about the woman he married for strategy. The fire ticked. The sea went on beneath the house. And has he? Coralie asked, before she could decide not to. He was silent for a long moment, then quietly, almost as though it surprised him. I am beginning to think he has been that foolish, yes. She crossed the room to him, slowly, the cane soft on the carpet, until she was close enough to see the exhaustion he let no one else see. For what it is worth, she said, I have been grateful every single day that you chose speed over comfort on that road, even if I was only ever a weapon to you. You stopped being only a weapon, he said, rough, some while ago. I have simply been too much a coward to say when. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her every chance to step back, and touched the bare hollow of her throat where no jewels lay, as though the emptiness there were the truest thing about her. Her breath caught. Neither of them moved to close the last inch. Then the long case clock in the hall struck 1, loud as a dropped tray, and they stepped apart like guilty children, and neither said what had almost been said, because in 3 days they would walk into a bright room full of the men who wanted them dead, and some things are safer left unfinished until you know you will live to finish them. Harrogate House stood ablaze against the winter dark, every tall window a square of gold, and carriages backed the length of the drive like a glittering funeral procession. Coralie watched it swell in the glass and felt her stomach turn to water because she knew this house. The last time she had climbed these steps, she had left them in a carriage with a door that would not latch. You've gone pale, the Duke said beside her. He was resplendent in unrelieved black and white, and he had not touched her since they entered the carriage, keeping the strict distance of a strategy. Good. Let them think it modesty. Remember, the shape of the night. We arrived together, we are gracious, and we are unhurried. We do not seek the Rennicks. We let them find you across a crowded room and understand, in front of 200 witnesses, that the sea gave you back, and if Gideon makes a scene, he cannot afford one. A man who flinches at a ghost invites questions about why he is haunted. He looked at her bare throat where the sapphires again were not. You are certain. I have never been more certain of anything. She had chosen a gown of deep sea green, and above it wore nothing at all. No diamonds, no pearls, no cold inherited fire, only skin, and the small white scar at her temple that no powder had quite hidden. Let every woman in that room count her stones, and then look at my empty neck and wonder what a duchess knows that they do not. The footman opened the doors. Warmth and candlelight and the roar of 200 voices rolled out to meet them, and the Duke offered his arm, and Coralie Bellamy, the drowned girl, the ruined name, walked back into the room she had been carried out of, to die. The Duke and Duchess of Ellesmere, the major domo cried. Heads turned like a field of wheat in wind. The whispers came at once, hushed and hungry. That is the new Duchess, out of nowhere, they say. Look, she wears not a single jewel. Is it poverty or is it pride? Coralie held her spine straight and her chin level and let them look, and the not knowing spread through the room like a chill under a door. Lady Merivale received them at the head of the great staircase, 60, upright as a mast, with eyes that had appraised 3 generations of ambition. Ellesmere, she said, and then turning the full weight of that gaze on Coralie. So, the Duchess the whole county cannot stop discussing. You are quieter than the gossip promised. And bearer, her eyes flicked pointedly to the naked throat. I find, my lady, Coralie said, that stones say only what a jeweler decided. I would rather be read than admired. Something sharpened in the old woman's face, interest, and the faint respect of one duelist for another. How very tiring for you, she said. And how promising. Go in. The whole of the North is here tonight. A pause, weighted with a meaning Coralie could not yet parse. Every family that matters, even the ones that oughtn't. They moved into the ballroom. And there, halfway down the blazing length of it, laughing at something a fair-haired young woman had said, stood Gideon Rennick, and beyond him, watchful and still, his father Lord Rennick, and his mother, Lady Adeline, wearing the enameled calm of people who had never once been made to answer for anything. Gideon had not seen her yet. Coralie's steps did not falter. The Duke felt the change in her arm and murmured, without moving his lips, "Not yet. Let him turn and find you already looking. Let him understand you were never afraid of this room." She fixed her eyes on Gideon Rennick's untroubled, handsome, spending face, and she waited for the moment he would feel the weight of a dead woman's gaze, and learn in front of everyone he had ever charmed exactly how badly he had failed. It was Lady Merivale in the end who lit the fuse, whether by accident or by that terrible instinct hostesses have for the seam in a room where the drama is hidden. "Lord Rennick," she called down the length of the floor in the lull between the music. "You keep to your corner like a smuggler. Come, have you met the new Duchess of Ellesmere? I don't believe your family graced the wedding." 200 faces turned, and Gideon Rennick, glass halfway to his mouth, followed his father's glance across the room and saw her. The change was extraordinary. The color left his face as though a plug had been pulled from it. The glass slipped from his fingers and struck the parquet, and the crack of it was loud as a pistol in the sudden hush. Wine bloomed dark across the floor. "Forgive me," he said too loudly, stooping for the shattered glass, his hands not entirely under his command. "I am clumsy tonight. Are you quite well, Lord Rennick?" Lady Merivale asked, all silken concern, her eyes bright as a magpie's. "You look as though you have seen a spirit." "A resemblance only." Gideon straightened. "Ashen. The Duchess reminds me of someone I once knew." "Someone who died," Coralie finished silently. "Someone you watched fall." "How singular," the Duke said, and though his voice was mild, it carried down the whole hushed room. "Do you know my wife, Lord Rennick?" It was Lady Adeline who stepped smoothly into the breach, the true strategist of the house. Coralie saw at once. "I fear we have not had the pleasure, Your Grace. Welcome to our small society, Duchess. You must forgive my son. He has been unwell and works too hard." "There is nothing to forgive," Coralie said, and met the older woman's eyes directly. "Though I believe your son and I have met, my lady, briefly, before my marriage." She let the silence stretch one heartbeat past comfort. "He will remember." "It was a memorable evening, was it?" Lady Adeline's smile did not so much as tremble, and Coralie understood she was facing something far more dangerous than Gideon. "How lovely one meets so many people," the music resumed. The room exhaled and pretended to return to itself. But the thing was done. Every soul present had watched Gideon Rennick blanch at a woman he could not name, and the not knowing was already curdling into speculation behind every fan. Who is she? Why did he drop his glass? What does Ellesmere's bride know? For an hour she played her part flawlessly, and all the while she felt Gideon's eyes crawl over her, felt his mind laboring at the impossible sum, alive, and a duchess, and married to the one man in England who wants my family in the ground. She stepped out at last onto the terrace for air, into the cold, clean dark above Lady Merivale's frozen gardens. She had been alone perhaps a minute when she heard the door and the voice. "You are supposed to be dead." She turned. Gideon stood in the spill of light. The charm scoured off him entirely now, and what was left underneath was uglier and more honest. "And yet," she said, "how?" It came out of him low and furious. "I left you on the rocks." "Your leg, the tide. No one uses that road in winter. You should be bones by now. Someone came who cared whether I lived." She kept her voice even though her pulse slammed. "Someone rode the coast in the dark and pulled me out of the sea you left me in. Unlike you, Gideon, you only ever came to see me gone. His jaw worked. What have you told him?" "Everything." She watched the word land like a blade. "The halcyon, the gallows sands. The 9 men your father drowned for the insurance and the manifest. My father died to keep everything. You have no proof. But his voice cracked on it, because he did not believe himself. It burned. It is gone, is it? She tilted her head and let him wonder, and saw the terror bloom behind his eyes, at the possibility that it was not. You searched an empty trunk, didn't you, Gideon, and you have not slept since. He came a step closer, and his hand rose, and a shadow moved between them. And the Duke of Ellesmere was there, unhurried, immense in his stillness. You will want to think, Alaric said quietly, very carefully, about where your hand goes next. Gideon stopped. This is a private conversation. There is nothing private left between you and my wife. The Duke did not raise his voice, and it was the more terrible for it. You threw her from a carriage onto the rocks, and left her to drown in the dark. Understand me plainly. She is the Duchess of Ellesmere now. She outranks you. She is under my name, and if any Rennick sends so much as a cold draught her way, I will not answer you in the Lords or the courts. I will answer you personally, and there will not be enough of the Rennick name left to bury. You can prove nothing, Gideon whispered, but he had gone gray. Not tonight, the Duke agreed. But I have waited 5 years to prove that my brother did not die in a storm that never blew. I am a patient man, Rennick. Ask your father how patient. He stepped aside, opening the way back to the light. Now, go inside, smile, and pray I am slower than I have ever been in my life. For a moment, Gideon looked as though he might strike out anyway. Then he saw the flat certainty in the Duke's eyes, the certainty of a man who had already measured the grave, and the fight went out of him. This is not finished, he managed. No, Coralie said from the dark. It is only beginning. But do sleep on it, Gideon. You look so terribly tired. He went. And when the door had closed, Coralie found her hands were shaking at last, now that there was no one left to see them do it. The Duke's fingers closed warm around hers. You were magnificent, he said low. And we must be more careful than ever from this hour. He is frightened now, Coralie, and frightened men do not grow cautious. They grow desperate. Good, she said, though her voice trembled. Let him feel the ground he thought was stone turn to sand under his feet. But even as she said it, 2 floors above in a shuttered card-room, Lady Adeline Rennick was already writing. Swift, unhurried, exact, the letter that would turn a frightened family into a dangerous one. And she had not written a single line about the manifest. She had written instead an address in Berwick, and beneath it a single word, family. Coralie could not sleep in Lady Merivale's silk-hung guest room, and so, an hour past midnight, she went looking for the Duke, and found, instead, the thing that turned the whole game. The house had quieted, but not entirely. A few lamps still burned along the gallery. She was passing the closed door of the small library when she heard Lady Adeline's voice through it, pitched low, and something in its calm made her stop and press herself flat to the cold paneling. Cannot keep the lid on it much longer, a man was saying. Not Gideon, but the Rennicks' own man of business, whom she had seen shadowing them all evening. The Sowerby woman has an independent surveyor going through the loss books as we speak. If he reaches the Sealark entry, then we burn the Sealark entry, Lady Adeline said, as one might discuss a torn hem. And the 3 ledgers behind it tonight, by morning coach. Let them find a gap where the fraud was, and call it careless clerking. A gap proves nothing, and the manifest. The one, the Bellamy girl's father, is a scrap of paper against the word of a peer of the realm, she said. Even if Ellesmere has it, it is her account against ours, and she is a ruined nobody who married our enemy. No jury hangs a Rennick on the say-so of a girl with a grudge and a title bought in a sickbed. Ellesmere believes her. Ellesmere is besotted, which is not a strength but the softest place in his whole armor. A pause. Coralie's blood had gone to ice. The girl has family in Berwick, a mother, a sister, or she did. until Ellesmere's men swept them up, but men can be bought, and walls have gates, nothing so crude as harm. Merely a reminder that the Duchess's cooperation buys her family's peace, and her accusations buy the opposite. That is a hanging matter itself, my lady, that is strategy, Lady Adeline said coldly. My husband taught our son that lesson too gently, and look what it bought us. A corpse who walks. Do not you be gentle with me. Find me a man near the family by week's end. Coralie had heard enough. She turned to flee, and walked directly into Lady Adeline Rennick, who had opened the door behind her without a sound. For a moment neither moved. Eavesdropping Duchess, Lady Adeline said, silk over a blade. How very below stairs of you. I was looking for the way back to my room, with your ear to my door. The older woman stepped close, and her scent was violets, and something colder underneath. Let me give you a gift, girl. Whatever you imagine you heard nothing. You have no proof and no name. The Duke will keep you while you are a novelty and a weapon, but the day you become a liability, he will set you down as lightly as he picked you up. They all do. You of all people should know how it feels to be put down. I am nothing like the girl your son left on the rocks, Coralie said, though her heart was hammering. No. Lady Adeline smiled, and it was the cruelest thing Coralie had ever seen. You are worse. That girl only lost everything. You have been given something back, and that means you have learned to be afraid of losing it again. Fear makes people so much easier to steer. She stepped back, smoothing her gloves. Sleep well, Duchess. Give my regards to your family when next you see them. If you see them. Footsteps in the gallery. And the Duke was there, taking in the scene, his face going to stone. Is there a difficulty? None at all, Your Grace, Lady Adeline said serenely. The Duchess and I were becoming acquainted. Such a promising girl. Do take care of her. And she swept away into the dark. The Duke drew Coralie into an empty morning room and shut the door. What did she say to you? It came out of her in a rush. The Sea Lark, the ledgers going south by morning coach, the plan to burn the fraud into a mere gap, and then, her voice breaking, her family. My mother. Pippa. They mean to use them to close my mouth. She pressed the back of her hand to her lips. They will send a man to Berwick by week's end. Something happened in the Duke's face. She had not seen before, not calculation, not banked grief, but fury, pure and absolute, and under it something that shook. They will not reach her, he said, drawing a notebook from his coat and writing as he spoke. Pippa and your mother are already within my walls at Ellesmere. Behind 6 men I would trust with my life. I will double them tonight. And I will have that coach of ledgers stopped and searched on the Berwick Road before it reaches the county line. For a magistrate who owes me a great deal hates the Rennicks more. He looked up, and you should know, because I will not keep it from you another hour. I already hold the manifest. My riders took your trunk the same night they took your family. The Halcyon's true papers have been locked at Ellesmere 3 weeks. The trunk Rennick's men pried open was empty, because I emptied it first. Coralie stared at him. You had it all this while, and you said nothing. Because the fewer who know where a hanging weapon lies, the longer it stays sharp, he said. But I am done keeping my distance from you. Coralie, I find I no longer can. He crossed the room and took her cold hands. Everything I said to Rennick on that terrace was strategy, and I meant every word. And none of it is why I would burn Ellesmere to its foundations before I let that woman near your family. That is not strategy. That is something I did not plan for and cannot manage, and I have stopped pretending otherwise. Alaric, I told you once that the only thing you could safely rely on about me was that I keep my word. His thumb moved over her knuckles. So here is my word. I chose you because you were useful. I would keep you now if you were of no use to me at all. Somewhere between the beach and this room, that became the truth, and I would rather be ruined telling you than safe pretending otherwise. You're supposed to be cold, she whispered. Careful. Impossible to move. I was. You have been, he said. A catastrophe. For my composure. She kissed him. And it was nothing like the quarter-hour contract in the Great Chapel. It was real and reckless and long overdue. His hands framing her face, hers fisted in his lapels, the careful distance of weeks collapsing into something neither had permitted and both had wanted. For a moment, the Rennicks and the sea and the drowned men fell away, and there was only warmth, and being chosen, and being, at last, entirely seen. The knock, when it came, was Lady Merivale's own hand, and her voice through the door was grim as a closing gate. Ellesmere, Duchess. Dress and come down, both of you. Lord Rennick is in my drawing room at 1 a.m, white with rage, demanding, I throw your wife out of my house tonight, and he is making accusations I am afraid I cannot simply ignore. They gathered in Lady Merivale's private study while the last of the ball guttered out below, the hostess behind her desk, the Duke and Coralie before it, and waiting beyond the door with his wife and son, Lord Rennick, come to make his charges formal. I will have the truth from you first, Lady Merivale said, before I let that man perform for me. All of it, Duchess. He calls you an impostor. He calls you a thief who stole his family's papers, invented a scandal, and staged her own disappearance to smear his house through a marriage of convenience to his enemy. It is, I will tell you frankly, a tidy story. A nobody bride who vanishes before a wedding and reappears as the wife of the one duke who hates the Rennicks. It raises questions I am obliged to see answered. So, answer them. Coralie looked at the Duke. He inclined his head. And so she told it, the whole of it, plainly, without heat. Her father's ruin, the pearls carried out in a locked box, the halcyon on the gallows sands, the manifest, Gideon's courtship, the false word about her mother, the carriage, the cliff, the rising tide, the man who had pulled her out of the sea. She left nothing, and she embroidered nothing, and when she finished, the only sound was the fire. They took you from a ball, Lady Merivale said slowly. Which house? This one, my lady. Your ballroom, weeks past. I wore no jewels then either, and not a soul marked me leave it. Something in the old woman's face went cold and personal. That is a remarkable tale, and it may even be true, but truth and proof are cousins, not twins. You have no witness to the cliff, no document of the fraud in your own hand, your word against a peer's, and half the county already whispering that you married your evidence. She folded her hands. I have no love for the Rennicks. Mortimer cheated my late brother over a shipping lease 15 years ago, and I have not forgotten it. But I do not wreck a great house on a beautiful story. What can you show me? Show her, Coralie said quietly. The Sea Lark. The Duke laid 3 papers on the desk. The Rennick lost books record the brig Sea Lark as foundered off the Needles 2 winters past, a total loss paid in full to the syndicate, Lady Sowerby's money among it, only she did not sink. She was sold out of the fleet 3 months before her supposed loss, renamed the Providence, and lies at a Bristol wharf this week taking on coal. Here is the bill of sale, the port register in her new name, a letter from the harbor master who has watched her 2 years. His voice was level as slate. One such error is careless clerking. I hold proof of 11 ships written off for insurance that were sold, renamed, or never existed at all, and of 1, the Halcyon, run deliberately onto the sands where 9 men drowned. I have her true manifest and 3 underwriters' letters, signed and dated, kept by an honest shipping agent named Silas Bellamy, who was murdered for keeping them. Lady Merivale looked at the 3 papers on her desk for a long time. Then she raised her eyes, and something in them had hardened into decision. That is not a scandal, she said softly. That is a gallows. Which is why, the Duke said, Lord Rennick has come at 1 in the morning to have my wife removed before people begin quietly to compare notes. He does not fear her story. He fears the arithmetic, that this room is full of people who put money in his ships, and some of them are already beginning to wonder. Lady Merivale rose and went to the window where the black gardens waited under frost. "Here is what I will do," she said. "I will not throw you out, nor will I let Rennick claim I silenced you to spare him. Tomorrow, before the whole party departs, I will hold the matter openly. My morning room, 11 o'clock, every guest who wishes to attend. Rennick may make his case. You may make yours. Society will judge. And Society Duchess. Judges on reputation and rank, both of which the Rennicks possess in quantity. So do not bring me feeling. Bring me the ships. Bring me something no denial can outlast." She turned. "You have until 11. Use the night." They used it. Back in the guest room, by the light of every candle they could find, they laid the case out across the floor like a battle map, the Sea Lark and her false grave, the 11 phantom losses, Sowerby's surveyor and what he would swear, Sir Gervais Keene who could say what an honest wreck survey looked like and what these plainly were not, Mr. Ives who could name in law what deliberate wrecking with loss of life was called, and what it earned a man. It was strong. It might even be enough. And if it is not, Coralie asked as the candles burned low, if they deny it all, and the room decides a peer's word outweighs 11 papers and a drowned agent? The Duke did not answer at once. He crossed to his traveling case, unlocked it, and took out a letter she had not seen before, creased soft with handling, as though it had been read 100 times. Then he said, "I play the card I have been holding for 5 years and praying I would never need. I found him 8 months ago, living under another name in a Cornish fishing village, half-eaten by guilt, the one man who was aboard the Halcyon that night and lived, because he refused to hang the false light and went over the side when another man did." He looked up. Jonas Crail, asleep in a room 3 miles from here. "And in the morning, if the ships are not enough, I am going to ask a broken man to stand up before the people who bought his silence and finally speak." Lady Merivale's morning room could hold 60, and by 11 o'clock it held 90, packed to the walls and spilling through the doors. For word of a duel in words between the Rennicks and Ellesmere's mysterious bride had run through the sleeping house like fire through gorse, and no one with a heartbeat had stayed abed for it. Lady Merivale stood at the center, the arbiter and the queen of the field. To her right, immaculate and composed, stood Lord Rennick, Lady Adeline, and Gideon. To her left stood the Duke of Ellesmere, and bare-throated, in the grey morning light, his Duchess. "We are not a court," Lady Merivale said, and the room stilled. "But we are, most of us, people who trust one another with our money, our names, and our children's futures, and a question has been raised this weekend that touches all 3. So it will be answered here in the open, and not in whispers behind fans. Lord Rennick, you asked for this. Begin." Lord Rennick stepped forward, the very portrait of wounded dignity. "It grieves me to speak ill of any woman," he said, "but I am compelled. The person you have received as the Duchess of Ellesmere was, until this autumn, a nobody, of no family, briefly entangled with my son. She was given the freedom of my house and repaid it by stealing private papers and staging a disappearance so theatrical we searched the coast for her in genuine fear, only to surface married in unseemly haste to the one man in England whose hatred of my house is public record." He turned to the room. "This marriage is a weapon, and this woman its edge. My family's honest misfortunes at sea are being twisted into monstrous fictions by a duke who has wanted my ruin for 20 years and has at last found a beautiful liar to help him." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Coralie felt it tilt toward him, toward rank, toward the comfortable story. "Fictions such as fraud," the Duke said, unhurried, stepping forward, "such as the deliberate drowning of 9 men. Let us examine them." Lord Rennick, since you raised them, let us have them up in the light. He held out his hand, and Corley placed the papers in it. Your lost books record the brig Sea Lark, foundered off the Needles, paid in full. Tell this room how a ship can sink 2 winters ago. He lifted the bill of sale high, and yet lie tied to a Bristol wharf this very week, under the name Providence, sold out of your own fleet 3 months before you claimed the sea had taken her. Lord Rennick's composure flickered. A clerical confusion. Ships are bought and sold. One name is confusion, the Duke agreed. Here are 11. He let the papers fall, one by one, onto Lady Merivale's table, each into a silence that grew deeper. 11 ships, written off for insurance, that were sold, renamed, or never launched at all. Everyone paid out to your syndicate, everyone drawn from the pockets of people standing in this room. He turned. Lady Sowerby, you engaged your own surveyor a fortnight past. What has he found? The Dowager Lady Sowerby rose on her cane, and her old voice cut clean across the room. Precisely what His Grace describes, and I have the preliminary in my reticule. When my man asked Rennick's office to produce the Sea Lark wreck survey, he was told the ledger had been sent away for copying. A dangerous rustle went through the crowd. In 40 years of widowhood, I have learned that when an honest man is asked for his books, he fetches them, and when a thief is asked, they have always just gone out for copying. This is slander, Lady Ottoline said, stepping forward cool as ever. Suspicion dressed as arithmetic papers can be forged by anyone with a grudge and a clerk. Where is your proof that any wreck was more than the sea's cruelty? Where is your witness to a single deliberate act? You have a resentful duke, a bought surveyor, and a nameless girl. Her gaze swept the room, gathering it back. Would any of you hang a peer of England on so much smoke? And the room wavered again, because she was formidable, and she was right that smoke was all it was, and a peer's word was heavy. Then, let us speak of the girl, the Duke said. Tell this room what became of Coralie Bellamy on the night she fled, Lord Rennick. Tell them about the carriage. Gideon had gone, the color of ash. No, then I will. She did not flee. She was handed into a carriage on a false report that her mother lay dying, driven to the cliff road above Barrowick, and thrown onto the rocks above a rising tide, left to drown in the dark. I know, because I pulled her out of that sea myself, her leg broken and her head laid open, and every word she told me has since been matched to fact. Gasps broke across the room. You cannot prove one word of it, Gideon burst out, too loud, too fast. She is unstable. Everyone can see she is unstable, inventing horrors for... Actually, said a rough voice from the back of the room. He can. Every head turned. A man stood in the doorway in a plain seaman's coat, weather-beaten gray, twisting a cap in scarred hands, out of place among the silk and the diamonds as a gull in a chandelier. He was shaking, but he did not sit down. Who are you? Lady Merivale asked. Jonas Crail, my lady boatswain of the brig Halcyon. That they'll have told you went down in a storm off the Gallows Sands 5 winters gone. He looked once at Lord Rennick, then away, as though the sight cost him. There weren't no storm. It were a flat calm and a full moon. We was ordered to hang a false light and run her onto the sand. She was insured for 3 times what were in her hold, worth more drowned than docked. I wouldn't do it. So, another man did, and I went over the side into the cold, and I'm the only soul aboard her as ever came up again. His voice cracked and held. They gave me money to go far and stay quiet, and I took it, God forgive me, and it's bought me 5 years of trying not to hear them 9 men in the dark. There was a lad aboard, a gentleman's brother, they said, asleep in the stern cabin, never knew the water was coming till it had him. He turned to the Duke, and his ruined face broke. I'm sorry, sir. I should have spoke 5 years past. The silence in that room was the silence of 90 people watching a great house fall. Mr. Ives, the barrister, rose quietly into it. For the benefit of the room, he said in his flat courtroom voice, what this man describes, the deliberate casting away of an insured vessel with loss of life, is not a scandal nor a misfortune. It is murder and fraud upon every underwriter here present. And it does not prescribe. It hangs. Sir Gervase Keene, Harbor Commissioner, was already on his feet, his vanity forgotten, his face grim as the sea in November. As Senior Commissioner of the Port of Berwick, he said, I will lay every one of these papers and this man's sworn statement before the Admiralty Court on Monday morning. God help me, I should have looked years ago. Lord Rennick's composure did not so much crack as vanish, leaving something small and cornered behind it. You will believe a drunkard off the docks, he said. Over. Over you? Yes, Mortimer, I rather think we shall. Lady Merivale's voice fell like a headsman's axe. She turned to the room she ruled. I will not have murderers and thieves eating at my table, Lord Rennick, Lady Adeline, and your son. You will be gone from Harrogate within the hour, and might spend the ride considering which ports still have boats to the continent. My footman will see you to your carriage. She paused and added, colder than anything yet, the Duchess of Ellesmere will remain. She was always the only person in this affair with clean hands and a bare throat. As the Rennicks were escorted out through a corridor of turned backs, Gideon protesting, Lord Rennick grey and silent, Lady Adeline's eyes fixed on Coralie with a hatred that promised this was not forgotten. Coralie felt her knees begin quietly to give. The Duke's arm was there at once around her waist. It's done, he murmured against her hair. No, she said, watching Jonas Crail weep into his cap while Lady Sowerby, of all people, pressed her own handkerchief into his scarred hands. For those 9 men, it's finally begun. By the time the last carriage had gone and Harrogate had emptied of its stunned guests, Coralie was hollowed out and could not stop shaking now that there was no room left to be brave for. The Duke found her by the tall windows of the emptied morning room. He came and stood beside her, and for a while neither spoke. What happens now? She asked at last. Now it leaves our hands and passes to slower, larger ones, he said. Keene lays it before the Admiralty on Monday. The surveyors finish the lost books. Every family the Rennicks robbed will hear and demand, and the accounts will not survive the asking. Their money was always other people's. Coralie, when the borrowing stops, there is nothing underneath. The house will come down. Not in an hour, but it will come down. He paused. And you will be known now as the woman who brought it down. I will be notorious. You will be respected, he said. It is a colder thing, but it lasts longer, and it cannot be carried out of your father's house in a locked box. He was quiet a moment. And your mother and Pippa are safe at Ellesmere. The coach with the ledgers was stopped on the Berwick Road at dawn, its strongbox intact. Everything the Rennicks meant to burn is in Keene's keeping now. It is all held, Coralie. You are all held. Coralie closed her eyes, and something she had been carrying since the cliff road finally set itself down. You kept every word. I told you it was the one thing you could rely on. He reached into his coat and hesitated. An uncertainty she had never once seen in him, which is why I want to give you this, and to say plainly why, because I have been a coward about plain speech too long. He drew out a small box and opened it. Inside, on dark velvet, lay no diamond and no string of inherited pearls. It was a single small pendant on a fine silver chain, a heron in flight, wings thrown wide, the twin of the signet she had glimpsed on the hand that lifted her out of the sea. You have worn no jewels since the night I found you, he said, low. First because they had taken everything. Then when it was a choice because a bare throat said what no stones could, that you would not gild a ruin to make other people comfortable. I would never ask you to cover that. It is the truest thing about you. He lifted the small heron from its box. But I thought you might wear this one, not to adorn you, nor as a collection or a cage or a debt in a book, only as a mark, that on the worst night of your life someone came looking and found you and chose you, and would choose you again every morning for the rest of a life if you would let him." His jaw tightened. That first ring was a contract. This is not. This is me. Asking Coralie's eyes had filled. "You are supposed to be cold and impossible and married to your revenge." "I was," he said. "You have been an absolute catastrophe for all of it." A breath. "I love you. I did not plan to. I do not fully know how to, and I am not taking it back." "Then put it on me," she whispered. He did, his fingers careful, at the nape of her neck, and the small silver heron came to rest in the bare hollow of her throat, the one jewel she had ever chosen, the one that meant she had been seen. And she turned in the circle of his arms and kissed him, in the emptied room where a great and rotten house had fallen that morning. And for the first time since a carriage door swung open over the sea, Coralie Bellamy was not afraid of tomorrow. 3 months later, the great hall of Ellesmere Hall had stopped being a fortress and started being a home. Where the cold portraits of arguing sterns had glowered, there was now warmth and noise and purpose. 24 women and half-grown children filled the long tables, the families of drowned sailors, the widows and orphans of men lost on ships. The Rennocks and their like had wrecked for the insurance. They were learning letters and figures and trades. They were being fed. They were being counted. Coralie had founded it with the first of the restored money and named it Halcyon House, so no one could ever again pretend the 9 men had no names. The Duke funded all of it, asked for no credit, and vetted every soul who came near the gates. Lord and Lady Rennick had been taken off a Calais packet by the Admiralty's men and brought home to stand trial. Gideon had not run in time either. The syndicate had collapsed as the Duke foretold, and the money that could be found was going back, slowly, through the courts, to the families it had been stolen from. It was on such a morning that Mrs. Penhallow brought word of a visitor, a pale, resolute young woman in traveling clothes who gave her name as Miss Harriet Rennick, Gideon's cousin, and asked, very quietly, to speak with the Duchess. Coralie received her in the library. "I have been through my uncle's study since it all came down," the girl said, setting a bound bundle of papers on the table between them. "And you should know the Halcyon was not the only one. There were other ships, other crews, and other women too. Girls my cousin courted and discarded when they grew inconvenient. 1 or 2 who simply vanished, the way you were meant to." Her voice shook. "Most are too frightened to come forward. I did not know who would help them. And then I thought of the woman who wore no jewels and was not afraid." She looked up. "Will you?" Coralie drew the papers toward her and began to read the names, the ships, the crews, the drowned, the discarded, and felt the old cold settle in her chest and, beneath it, something harder and steadier than cold. "All of them," she said. "Every ship, every name, every woman he thought the sea would keep quiet." She looked toward the seaward window, where the water beat against the walls of the house that had once been a fortress and was now a refuge. "Tell them there is a place and a duchess, and neither of us frightens easily anymore." That night she stood at that window with Alaric's arms around her and the small silver heron warm at her throat, watching the last light go off the sea that had once tried to take her. "Do you ever think of it?" she asked. "The night you found me, every day," he said against her hair. "The 5 minutes I nearly waited, the road I nearly did not take, the dead woman I nearly rode straight past in the dark. I was half a man before you. And now I feel everything, and it is terrible, and I would not trade a moment of it." His arms tightened. "You ask if I believe in fate. I don't. On the worst night of your life, someone chose to stop and to look and to carry you up off the rocks. That is not fate, Coralie, but a choice, and it changed everything for us both. You were left in the cold to be forgotten. I only refuse to forget you. Everything else, you built yourself. She had been thrown away once, counted as a debt, and closed. But someone had come looking in the dark and found her and chosen her, and together they had turned the coldest water into the warmest house on that whole gray coast, proving that the people the world tries to drown are so often the very ones who come back and change the tide. Thank you for staying with Coralie and Alaric all the way to the last page. If this story reached something in you, the fight for the forgotten, the courage it takes to survive being thrown away, the quiet power of being chosen, then share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Tell us in the comments which moment held you hardest and where in the world are you listening from. And if you believe, as we do, that even the coldest water can carry someone home, subscribe and ring the bell so the next story finds you. You are the reason these stories exist. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing that no one ever is beyond being found.